The fighting between Russia and Ukraine triggering, a realignment of the stars, or at least moves to change things in things like energy. French power group EDF says it now hopes to seal a deal to equip 6 next generation EPR nuclear reactors in India within the coming months. That announcement follows Wednesday's welcoming of Narendra Modi to the French presidential palace. The Indian Prime Minister, the first foreign leader to visit Emmanuel Macron since the latter's re-election. Well, let's talk to someone who was there. Jawed Ashraf is India's ambassador to France. Thank you for being with us here on France.
Thank you for having me here.
Before we go into the issues such as energy and food security that are at the core of all of this, your reaction when you see those images out of Ukraine?
Well, I think we've been very clear from the beginning. I mean, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had expressed deep anguish about the killing and loss of life. We've condemned the civilian deaths that have taken place in Ukraine. We have also called for independent investigations into allegations of humanitarian disasters and war crimes that have been alleged. I think we've been also very clear in calling for every country that has the obligation really to respect the integrity and territorial integrity and sovereignty of others, to respect international law and abide by the UN Charter. We see no recourse or no option other than to return to the path of dialogue and diplomacy to resolve this crisis. There has to be an immediate cessation of violence and military operations, and there must be efforts made not just by Ukraine and Russia, but by all parties to bring about some kind of a settlement to this awful humanitarian crisis that is taking place. So I think we've been very clear on where we stand on this. We stand on the side of peace, and we would like to see solutions rather than merely statement of positions on this.
We heard Brazil's candidate for president, Lula da Silva, saying on Wednesday how both Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin are, quote, equally responsible for the war that's unfolding. When I hear you talk about the need for the respect of territorial integrity, I take it that that's not India's position?
Well, we've, right in the beginning, expressed regret that the path of diplomacy and dialogue was abandoned, and that had led to the start of a conflict. So I think we've been very clear about we're not got into the business of apportioning blames and holding people responsible. We see the facts as they are on the ground.
That
and
call to respect territorial integrity, that targets Moscow.
Well, you can see it very clearly what it means, that every country has the obligation to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of every other country. I mean, and that position speaks for itself, and we continue to call for an end to violence and for a return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. I mean, really, there is everything that all of us must do. This is not just a Russia-Ukraine issue. This is not just merely a European crisis, but it has ramifications for international law. It has ramifications and consequences for the entire world. And we are very conscious of it. And in fact, we have offered to support whatever we can do to address the food crisis that is taking place in the world.
Yeah, the food crisis, the French president and the Indian prime minister talked about it quite a bit, because Russia and Ukraine, both major exporters to the developing world, France with an eye most notably on Africa. We may be headed towards a big food crisis. India would like to be able to export wheat at a subsidized price. The WTO doesn't agree. How are things moving on that score?
Well, we had, the two leaders, and, they have such wonderful conversations each time they meet. They don't state positions. They talk, explore opportunities and options. And I must say that yesterday was a very good conversation on this. We are, of course, looking at a multilateral initiative, something that we can coordinate through a multilateral process. But also we have offered, and there are many countries which want to import directly from us. And we are in a position to do that. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said repeatedly that he particularly sees this problem for small and poorer countries. They're going to be hit very badly by this. So we have offered as part of our support that we can export wheat at subsidized rates. But I think there are WTO constraints on that, and we've requested France that if they can work together within the WTO to have a WTO carve-out for this awful and this pressing humanitarian crisis.
When India on Wednesday suggested there may be curbs on wheat exports, is that to put pressure on the WTO?
No, I don't think that we work in that way. We do try to see that we have a right amount of balance between what our domestic needs are and what we are in a position to export. And we would certainly like to see that it takes place in an organized manner so that the food and the subsidized or wheat in whatever form, whatever price we sell it, reaches the right place at the right time to the right people. Incidentally, I must add that for the past 2.5 years, we have been providing free food to 800 million people in India based on our stock holdings. And it is something that we want to extend to the ability to support the needs of the people elsewhere in the world to fight hunger and to avoid the crisis that we are facing. So I don't think this is really a question of trying to put pressure, but it is trying to ensure that there is eventually a very smooth flow to the right people at the right time at the right price.
India has been diversifying its arms imports for years, and we know it with the sale of Rafale jets, for instance, and they talk about submarines now. When it comes to the energy sector, has the war in Ukraine been a wake-up call to go faster in diversifying? When we had that announcement there by the French energy giant EDF that it's poised perhaps to sell 6 of these next-generation nuclear plants, is the war in Ukraine a factor?
No, I think we've been discussing this project for years together now. Look, Prime Minister Modi in particular has been extremely conscious on the need for decarbonization and for energy security and energy independence. So these are 3 very important objectives. As you know, we are perhaps the only G20 country which is on path to exceed at this point of time our 2030 commitments that we made in Paris in 2015 because we've invested heavily in solar, wind, and ocean. And now nuclear energy, like in the case of France, is a very important part of our strategy. We've been discussing this project with France and with EDF for some time. EDF has made last year a final techno-commercial offer, which runs into 8,000 pages, by the way. We're looking through it. We're also discussing the financing side of it. Ultimately, what we are looking at, and both sides recognize this, is to be able to meet the regulatory requirements in terms of safety, which I think there won't be a problem about, and also being able to produce power that is affordable and competitive insofar as the market in India is concerned. We've made a lot of progress in the last 1 year in our bilateral discussions. It has the commitment at the highest level in India and in France, and we have a number of committees at very high levels that are looking into it. So we're very, based on the progress we've made in the last 1 year and few months, we're very optimistic that we can make and reach some conclusion in the coming months, which will go a long way in contributing towards our energy strategy of security, independence, and decarbonization.
Ambassador Ashraf, human rights groups have been sounding the alarm during the month of Ramadan that's just finished about the targeting of the minority Muslim community in India. France is home to Europe's largest Muslim population. Did it come up in conversation between Narendra Modi and Emmanuel Macron?
Well, let me first answer this question in 2 parts. I think the media reports have been there are, but I'll tell you this, India is home to 180 million Muslims. They have all enjoyed this holy month of Ramadan through fasting and piety and through the act of compassion and charity. We've had wonderful Eid celebrations in India. As you know, it's a country where, right from president to the prime minister to everyone greets the people of India on the occasion of Eid.
But there were these intercommunal clashes where it was the Muslim homes and shops that were bulldozed and not the Hindu.
No, I don't think that is a correct characterization. there were tensions, there were clashes between communities, but I think this was using a very rushed judgment, broad brush, to say that one community was targeted or the other wasn't. I think it was really about anti-encroachment drive, which may have, and I think there was enough evidence to suggest that it was agnostic as far as the faiths of people were concerned. There were those in majority communities, since you want to characterize it that way, who also complained about their buildings having been demolished. I think we must understand that, we are a nation of 1.4 billion people living in immense diversity, 22 official languages. Every faith is present there. We're a nation in an extraordinary phase of transformation, progress, and development. It's a huge social churn taking place. But there is absolute constitutional law in India. There is an effective judiciary. There is administrative systems that work. And I think if you even look at the data on welfare benefits that are very evident, it is completely free from any prejudice.
Shouldn't the Prime Minister be speaking out more?
Well, I think Prime Minister has spoken out, but I don't think on a number of occasions he's spoken about amity, he's spoken about the need for all of us to move together in step. There are any number of speeches he's spoken. He meets communities from every faith all the time. There is no question about that. But I think it is too much sometimes in a federal setup where law and order is essentially a state subject, something which is often missed abroad, that in a very, very strongly federal structure of India, law and order and policing is a state subject. The district administration is fundamentally in charge for it. And it would be, I think, imposing too much of a responsibility outside even the constitutional framework to expect Prime Minister to be able to respond to every act of violence, every act of social tensions. But I think on every conceivable occasion, at the right time, at the right place, he has spoken about it, and he has participated in events involving every faith. I have personally seen it. He has spoken at length on the message of Islam, the message of peace and inclusion, and that is there. So I don't think that that these kinds of characterization does justice not just to the situation, but to the complexity of what we actually live through.
Just let me finish with a brief personal question for you. What do you make of this record drought that you're experiencing across the whole of the, drought, heat wave across the Indian subcontinent with these incredibly high temperatures?
Well, I mean, this is just, again, one more evidence of what, Prime Minister Modi has also been speaking about, as has President Macron and many other leaders in the world, that climate change is a real thing. It is not an abstract science, and it is being lived every day. We see it in the heat waves everywhere. We see it in fires. We see it in floods. We see it in the melting glaciers. And one of the tragedies is that it is the cumulative effect of the industrialization based on fossil fuel over 3 centuries. The impact is perhaps today being felt far more in the developing world than in the developed world, which made the contribution. But we don't take that position, and therefore, while we are working with the world to find affordable solutions, accessible solutions towards an ecological transition to mitigate the impact of global warming and to adapt to it, we are doing all that we can. And as I just explained to you, in 3 fundamental ways: augment clean energy supply, make changes in the demand side, including, we use renewables, we use hydrogen. And so change in the demand patterns, increase in supply, as well as afforestation and change in lifestyle. Prime Minister is a great believer that the cleanest energy is the energy that is not consumed. So we need to have mechanisms, and we need to have a change in our attitude towards a lifestyle that is less demanding on the resources of nature. It's going to be a long journey for all of us together.
Right.
And India and France are working very closely on it, including on the International Solar Alliance, which now has 105 members.
So much more to talk about. Less is indeed more when it comes to stopping global warming. Jawed Ashraf, India's ambassador to France, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me here. Great pleasure.